Hey everybody, long time no see. I was trying to have a vacation during the poor ad revenue month of January, but of course everything had to go nuts, so instead of taking 2 weeks off and having a video ready for you by the end of the month, I got to take about a week off and had 3 weeks of dealing with some life stuff. That's whatever though, cause I've got a new spooky game for y'all called HellSign. Alrighty now, full disclosure. This is a sponsored video, and I've been working with Ballistic Interactive to showcase this game as best I can. This video is meant to show off all the cool features the guys at Ballistic worked on, including all the stuff they just put out in a couple of major updates, and this video is going live on Friday instead of Saturday because today marks the start of HellSign going on a pretty deep discount on the Steam store. Links in the description, of course, and I gotta say, even at full price, this bad boy would be worth your time. So what exactly is HellSign? Well, in short, it's an isometric horror game where you play as a tradie that specializes in the booming market of identifying and removing all things spooky from the nation of Australia. Your investigative gear is just as important, if not more important, than what you take in to defend yourself with, and if you aren't careful, you'll get wrecked by low-level enemies getting the better of you before you can even figure out what the big bad is haunting a house. Speaking of those big bads, poltergeists are a serious threat, and you're gonna need to do a lot of prepping and gearing up to even stand a chance of taking them on. By the way, the spookies are also going to be messing with you every chance they get. Before we get any deeper into HellSign, let's address what you're going to see on the Steam page because I know you're going to see it, and if I didn't talk about it, you'd all get suspicious of the both of us. The game recently got review bombed after a poorly worded announcement, and gamers rose up on the Steam forums. The gist of it is that Ballistic announced late last year that the game was going to leave early access in Q2 of 2021, but it was worded so poorly that people thought that they were just calling what they had at the moment version 1.0 and then ditching the game. This isn't the case at all. Since this announcement, they've been still active on the forums, they've put in an entire new set of lesser bosses and also a new map set too. Since the announcement that HellSign was going to move out of early access, while Steam forums are usually a nasty place to be, however, some people here got so nasty that the Steam admins had to step in, and you'll notice that a lot of the negative reviews barely have an hour of playtime on HellSign, and some of them, when the review was made, they hadn't even played the game in the last 2 weeks before making the review, and likely spent more time on the forums spreading what I figured out to be overtly misinformation than they did actually playing the game. Just for everyone's peace of mind here, before I even agreed to do this video, I spent a good 3 hours playing this game, plus I looked through all of the roadmaps and update posts on the HellSign forums, and finally I overtly asked the guys at Ballistic Interactive about this whole situation before I agreed to make this video. By their own admission, they screwed the pooch on the announcement and told people about features that were still in the "hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this?" phase that ultimately turned out to be things they just weren't able to do. This is Ballistic's first game, and they admit that they screwed up here, but they aren't abandoning the game in the slightest. And I for one can tell you, after well over 20 hours into the game, HellSign does not give off a vibe of being unfinished at all, and I had a lot of fun with it. Not to mention, since taking the deal, they've been adding more content to the game, which is the opposite of jumping to 1.0 and running off. And you guys already know I don't just jump for any deal I'm offered thanks to the anti-sponsor segments. Now, let's actually talk about the game. Let's start at the character creation page. You'll be given quite a few options for what your avatar is going to start out with as far as skills and items go, and each one has a bit of flavor text. These are more like backgrounds than character classes, as you'll be able to eventually level into all the skills with enough dedication, but leveling up takes a bit, so what skills you start with are going to heavily affect what approach you're going to take. I opted for a background as an archaeologist that put my starting stats and investigation related skills and started me with the Dead Man's Map. This was very helpful for investigation related tasks. However, I was pretty badly behind the 8 ball as far as anything else went, as I had no skills in defensive traps, medicine, armor, or even the ability to properly use a primary weapon, which you can still equip some primary weapons without the skill, but you're going to take a pretty bad penalty when using them. I was pretty good at finding lucrative clues and evidence signs during the earlier levels, but as soon as any cryptids showed up, I was done for, as I had a hard time shooting my little Saturday night special, and when the fight was over, I didn't have the skills or means to properly heal myself. Alternatively, I could have picked the combat heavy role and had the opposite problem, where I was wiping the floor with them spooky boys, but I couldn't find any clues to save my life, so I would have been broke until I leveled into some proper investigation skills, which also would have put me behind the 8 ball for high-level hauntings later on, as I wouldn't have enough cash to buy the better guns I needed. So what are these jobs that you can take that you'll be using said character builds to take on? They take 3 major forms: figuring out what the big spooky thing in a given place is, clearing out the lesser spooky things in a place, and attempting to kill the big spooky thing. Seems straightforward enough, right? Well, in a way it is, but the real variety comes from how each time is going to be an entirely different go-round based on the placement of the clues and where the spookies are hiding. You could get a fairly straightforward map where the clues are easy to find and you're able to find out what cryptid is lurking where well before they jump out at you, or you could get dogpiled by all the monsters at once before you even find your first clue and get wrecked right back to your safe house. Based on all the stuff in HellSign, I had a bit of trouble figuring out exactly how I was going to structure this video and go about telling you about everything, but eventually I figured out the best way to do it is to take you through all the stages of the game and how your playstyle evolves as you get better at handling all things spooky. At the very beginning of the game, you pick up what's supposed to be a pretty simple job in a low-risk area, but then you get sucked into the literal shadow realm and murdered to death by the Shadow Beast. Welcome to HellSign. After that, you're going to start out with what are actually essentially baby jobs that no one else will take on the grounds that they're too low risk and therefore not nearly lucrative enough for a seasoned hunter's time. However, they're going to be more than enough for you, and you'll probably still get wrecked a couple times doing these as you learn how the game handles. These are your scouting and forensic missions. The latter aren't even paranormal extermination jobs. It's basically a CSI job that's been subcontracted out to you because the cops think there's a chance there might be cryptids on the premises, and they don't want to pay out for health insurance in the event that one of their own CSIs goes in there and gets mauled, so they're leaving it up to you. Most of the rooms in these houses are literally cordoned off from you, and you'll have hardly any clues to find before the job's done, but it's gonna teach you how to find the clues. There are some cryptids here, but it's likely gonna be a few albino spiders at most, which according to your guidebook, the Cryptonomicon, aren't even really all that unusual down in the land of plenty. The former is a low-level investigation job, which while there's still zero equipment interference, there will be monsters that actually stand a chance of killing you, and if you aren't careful, you're gonna get wrecked. You'll also need to use your reference book to deduct what the poltergeist is that's hanging around this house. Don't worry though, the poltergeists here will be inactive. However, there's still cryptids like the Tasmanian megapede and specters that will kill you, so it's best that you learn what types of ammunition are effective against what and how to use some of those tools you picked up to figure out what's lurking nearby. Now, as far as the horror factor goes in the early game, you're gonna get spooked. A lot. Even if you start out with the right gear to be able to sniff out what's lurking in the dark, you likely won't know how to effectively use your tools based on the limited power each forensics tool has. Oh, and by the way, you're literally wandering into a haunted house where you've been tasked with searching for things that go bump in the night. Stuff's gonna jump out at you a whole lot, and you're gonna jump in your seat more than you're willing to admit, because on top of having a giant spider jump out at you, you are now trapped in a small enclosed room with a giant spider, and you're having a very hard time hitting the thing with your crappy little gun. Things are gonna get pretty tense creeping through the forest and literal haunted houses, especially for the first few gigs, as you're going to have no idea like where monsters tend to hide, and things are gonna constantly be jumping out at you because you have no clue about how to properly go about sweeping an area. Don't worry, you'll learn eventually. So just to get you up to speed, there are 3 major maps you'll be hunting the spookies in. They're essentially tile sets that all act roughly the same, but each time it's going to be different based on where rooms are placed and where the spookies are hiding. They're going to be out in the woods where people have been doing rituals and stuff, haunted houses, and junkyards. Also, it seems that everyone in Australia owns these crazy ranch-style homes, or at the very least, poltergeists are very particular about what kind of architecture they haunt. The forests are big and open, which is really good for when you need to book it away from something that's a little too tough for you that just jumped out. But the downside of that is it can be really hard to find clues even with the dead man's map and all your tools. The houses, on the other hand, are the opposite, where the largely indoors maps are divided into conveniently sectioned off rooms, making it easy to systematically sweep for cryptids and artifacts. However, if something gets to drop on you that you weren't prepared for, that's it. You'll wake up in your safe house after getting thoroughly spanked by a pack of ghouls. Then there's also how across all tile sets, paranormal entities like to mess with you. This takes the form of visual distortions on your screen, specters warping you into random rooms in a house where you'll have a hard time figuring out where you are and where the nearest exit is, or straight up rendering your tools useless with spectral interference. Heck, sometimes the ghost will straight up clown on you by making a fake version of your van, so you'll be running up to your van and suddenly it disappears and you're just like, wait, what? Then there's the junkyard tile set that literally got added in just last week. Junkyards are especially tough tough, since they seem to exhibit the detracting factors of the other two settings in a way that makes them especially challenging. They're outdoors, which can make clue hunting or even so much as finding your bearings especially hard, but there's also a lot of clutter around, meaning that if something gets to jump on you, you're going to have a very hard time getting away. And on the note of getting eaten by giant centipedes or otherwise getting killed, don't worry too much about dying. I can't get too into it for story spoiler reasons, but dying isn't the end of the world or even too much of a setback, as when you die, at least on the default difficulty, you'll be sent back to your safe house with any and all artifacts you've collected, and you'll even get partially paid for whatever parts of the job you were able to complete before getting mauled by spiders. This is for the best, as the early game can already be pretty crushingly hard without not getting any XP or sellable artifacts. If you love pain though, you can play in hardcore mode, which increases enemy damage, and if you die, you don't get any rewards or artifacts whatsoever, but I'd really suggest getting a normal playthrough under your belt before you do that. Once you get your fill of the baby investigations, you'll eventually work up to your first real extermination jobs. Phantoms were added during the last major update and serve as baby's first ghost busting. Phantoms are kinda tanky and will kill you if you aren't taking them seriously. However, ultimately, so long as you know what you're doing, you won't have too bad of a time. In order to fight the phantoms, you'll need to be able to deduce what exactly is haunting the place, so sucks to suck if you haven't gotten around to putting a skill point into investigation, and then make sure you have the right ammo to hurt the thing. Because stuff that's made out of shadows tends to not be overly inconvenienced by getting shot at with conventional ammunition. Don't worry about character builds too much though, as you can respec anytime you need to at your safe house so you don't accidentally build your character into a corner. The two phantoms you'll be facing are the Lamia, and no, not the monster girl kind, you weebs, and the Skull X. The fights are pretty straightforward, as phantoms are low level, and therefore once you've ID'd them, there isn't any further research needed, and so long as you've cleared a large enough space to fight them in without having to worry about a bunch of bugs joining the fight too, you should be able to get through it fine. If you do manage to collect all the artifacts, deduce what the phantom haunting a place is, and then kill the thing, you'll receive a sizable chunk of change for the early game that'll help you get the gear you need to start really playing in the game. So congratulations! You were able to survive the basic jobs that are so easy 99% of hunters won't bother to take them. Now you're moving up to the sweeping jobs, advanced investigational jobs, and exterminating etchery. At this point, you'll probably have enough levels on your character to spec into at least one of the basic things you didn't start out with, such as first aid, using traps, and equipping primary weapons without penalties. You also might have had a chance to play around with crafting and get yourself something fancy like the volley gun, or trinkets that help you with your leveling up. As for those two new job types you'll be taking, sweeping is kind of like the opposite of investigation. Rather than carefully going through each location looking for clues and avoiding fights whenever possible, now you're sweeping through a location to kill anything that moves or goes bump in the night, and your payment is hinged on how many spookies you bag instead of whether or not you were able to find all the clues. You can still find clues, and in fact you should, as the artifacts that aren't directly related to the big bad in an area will tell you what exactly is lurking at a given location, and you can piece together the info you need to make sure you don't get dunked on. Find a few scraps of red-tipped fur? Spiders. Go get the incendiary ammo and some jerry cans to set up a choke point. See a set of ridged fingerprints on the house? Ghouls. Get the silver ammo in a bear trap to make sure that it holds still, or maybe a door guillotine so you can take off most of its HP before you fight it. Find some red crystals inside of a house? That means Nephilim are in the area, so if you hear that bell, it's time to book it the literal hell out of here. Now let's talk about the new baddies you're going to be fighting in a sec. Ghouls are the first enemy that you're going to be going up against that are a real threat, because while the Tasmanian Megapede may be able to kill you early on, as soon as you figure out how they move, they never give you any trouble. Ghouls, on the other hand, are fast, a little tanky, and do a lot of damage to low armored players, and given that you likely won't have any high capacity or fast reloading weapons yet, if you don't get them with your first magazine, you're going to be in serious trouble. There's also how low level enemies you came across in the baby missions now travel in packs. Red hatch spiderlings weren't too much of a trouble in groups of 2 or 3, but when there's like 10 of them coming at you, you can't just point and shoot at them anymore because there's just too many. You're gonna have to either get really good at figuring out where they're hiding before they jump out at you and set up traps that will get all of them in one go, or if you spec'd into using trinkets early on, equip the boot knife and master dodging, as lucky for you, a red hatch spiderling's HP pool is just low enough where a successful dodge counter with the boot knife will kill them. Now you just have to perform 10 perfect dodge rolls before they get your HP to 0. As for those Nephilim I mentioned earlier, they're literally invincible and kill you dead quick, so your only option is to get good at memory memorizing the path you took into the house and making sure that you never back yourself into a corner. The only thing worse than getting 2/3 of your health taken off by the grabby boys is charging headfirst into a ghoul nest while you're getting away. Now, aside from the new spookies, new gigs, and new ways to survive the paranormal now that you've leveled up a bit, there's something else you're going to notice. The spookies are fighting back against your gear. You'll notice that underneath the difficulty rating of each job, there's a little meter of squiggle waves denoting interference. The interference level on your first few jobs is going to be literally 0, so you might not even be aware of it. There are even a few cases of people getting so confused by this on the Steam forums that they thought their game was broken, and the devs had to explain that the game was working as intended and that it's just the ghost messing with your cheapo gear you start with. You're going to need to buy higher end gear, or else you're going to have a very hard time getting anything done, as while bullets are still going to work so long as you had the right type for the monster you're shooting at, you're still going to have a very bad time if you can't deduce what something is, where it is, and also you're gonna have a bad time because you just can't find any of the clues you need to get paid. The solution to this is just to save your money and get some better gear. Low-end gear will still work in situations where there's interference, but it's gonna be a pain in the neck trying to figure out what is an actual sign of a paranormal artifact versus what's just the ghost screaming into your microphone because they think it's funny. Once you've learned how to handle yourself in more spiritually active places and you've got a shiny enough gun, you'll be taking on the Etri. Etri come in 2 flavors, Ifrit and the Haryanago. These spirits are more complicated than the Phantom, so you'll have to do more investigation just to figure out what the spooky thing is if you want to stand a chance against them, and you're going to need some proper gear to take them on. Etri sites are going to have tougher enemies like multiple ghoul spawns, but not quite several jumping at once just yet, and the occasional shadow beast incursion. You're going to need to fully sweep an area if you weren't in the habit of doing that already. There's a bit of push-pull between the mindsets of avoiding enemy spawns whenever possible to conserve on traps and healing items versus making sure that there's no chance that something else is going to spawn in and complicate things on the off chance that your fight with the big bad takes you into an unexplored area. The Ifrit seems to be the more common of the two, or at least for me it was, since I favored houses over forests, and the Ifrit seems to spawn in houses. It's a giant flaming skull that spawns little flaming skulls, and it laughs like it's literally Satan. The Ifrit isn't too complicated, but it'll do a lot of damage to you as it does try to kill you with fire. The Haryanago, on the other hand, seems to be a bit harder to find and is the more complicated of the two. You're going to need some quality night vision goggles to properly see this mid-level 90s anime villainess, and she'll be using her razor hairs in an area control attack before charging you and taking a big chunk of your health pool. I'll admit that I had an easier time than I should have with these two, as the boss update rolled out when my main save was in the late game. While yokai like the Haryanago didn't seem to have too much of a problem with the early muskets brought into feudal Japan, they never seem to really expect modern weaponry like what I have. As it seems while yokai are very easily able to handle half a dozen goons packing muskets that take 2 minutes to load, aim, and fire, when I pull out my M60 general purpose violence emitter packing 90 UV emitting 7.62 spooky removal devices fired at 650 spooky removal devices per minute, they seem to drop faster than they can get off and So after you've advanced in the story quest a bit and gotten into the upper levels, you'll officially be in the big leagues. You won't even look at anything lower than an active poltergeist sighting, since everything else doesn't pay the kind of money you need to get the toys you want, and you actually understand how the Dead Man's Map works now. While recovering a single artifact might pay better than a fully completed job at lower levels, you'd best come prepared as no one is playing around here. That one time in the prologue where you got pulled into the Shadow Realm to get spanked by Shadow Beasts? Yeah, that's a regular occurrence in active poltergeist sites. Mimic doors exist now to take out 1/3 of your health pool because screw you, that's why. And before you even get inside the house, half a dozen giant tentacles are going to try and jump you right outside of your van, and you've seen enough animes to know this is not a good situation to be in. Oh, and before you even summon the big bad's true form, they can attack you in their ghast form, which is invincible, moves faster than pretty much anything else in the game, and kills you quick. You'll get an actual alert in the top right of your screen when the big bad is within insta-jibbing distance, and your only recourse is to put down a special trap that's available to you regardless of if your build has trapping in it or not, and then making sure you have a clear path to that trap at all times in the event that the gas shows up. If that's the case, a literal wee-woo noise will start going off, and you're gonna have to run like literal hell back to your trap and hope you don't bump into any junk on the floor, as a split second is all it takes for the gas to catch up to you. Once you make it back to your trap and it goes boom, it'll temporarily temporarily dispel the poltergeist long enough for you to have like maybe 10 minutes or so to place a new trap, finish your investigation, and summon the thing in its true form in hopes of killing it and never having to worry about money again. So let's talk about those poltergeists, which I admit at the time of writing this, I still haven't been able to properly beat any of them, although I did come pretty close a couple times. They come in 3 flavors of your arse being grarse, and they're the lawnmower. Each of them can only be effectively harmed by one type of ammo, and you're going to need special gear if you want to even survive against them, down to specific weapon attachments and trinkets, and on top of that, those attachments and trinkets will vary between the same type of poltergeist based on pathology, since not all poltergeists are made by the same kind of magic and composition. The first and relatively safest of the 3 is the Banshee. The Banshee is a slow-moving entity and doesn't require any special gear to see, but its screams will kill you if you forget to wear hearing protection, and they can spawn in some very tanky variants. Banshees also spawn lots of little spirits that you're going to need to crowd control and can generally wreck you without them. Then there's the Wrath of the Bronies in the form of the Kelpie. The Kelpie is only harmed by incendiary attacks and requires hazmat protection, as it spews demon oil all over the place to trap you and then runs you down with its Satan hooves. The Kelpie fights can get out of hand very quickly, as there's a lot of play between types of Kelpies, and if you bring the wrong things into your summoning, your only recourse is to run for the van or just die. Lastly, we've got the nastiest of them all, the Shadow. Not to be confused with Shadow Beasts, as while those are nasty, the Shadow is a whole new level of nasty. The Shadow can't even be seen with the naked eye, and even high-level night vision goggles can barely reveal where the shadow is when it's nearby, so you'll need to buy the special infrared goggles if you actually want to stand a chance of keeping a bead on the thing. If the shadow being damn near invisible and sneaking up on you to hit you as a knockdown attack wasn't bad enough, it also spawns big old pools of blood, forcing you away from areas where you have the advantage, and possibly into other monster spawns if you are lazy with your sweeping. Poltergeist will push you to your absolute limit and test your investigational skills. By the way, while part of me thinks it goes without saying, you can get the deduction wrong before invoking a poltergeist, and if a different poltergeist shows up than what you were expecting, just run. You done goofed and it's all downhill from here. Now, I glossed over them before during the gameplay section, but now I'm going to talk more about all the tools that you'll use to figure out what exactly is haunting a house. You used to be able to just search highlighted objects in a location and see if there was something there, using your tools as a means to narrow down where the artifact was hiding, but I guess people just tried to brute force their way through houses to find clues without using the tools, which is lame, so now artifacts are hidden in very specific spots where you'll need your tools to find them. You're going to start out with some very basic stuff that if you don't get it at the start of your character build, they'll cost about as much as a meal at a fast casual restaurant, so you'll be able to get them no matter what. Your first 3 major tools are going to be the EVP scanner, which makes a funny noise when you're near a spooky thing, but literally everything interferes with its ability to scan for the spookies. This is likely the first tool you're going to toss, as literally everything else is more useful than it, but it still serves its purpose while you're learning the ropes. Next is the blacklight, which is very useful for when you're just starting out, as it'll let you figure out what exactly is haunting nearby, which is a very, very important thing to have when you're starting out. Just go to any dead body and use the blacklight on it, and you'll be able to expend your battery power for the location, identity, and even a buff against the cryptid in question. You only have enough power to reveal what's lurking in the shadows and where it is about 3 times, but you won't have to worry about scanning for the same thing twice, as once you've revealed something, the other bodies you scan will have the options grayed out if the cryptid in question is already aware to you, or it'll just outright say, hey, you already killed this cryptid, you don't need to expend your battery power. So you're going to not really waste any juice. The only downside is that there's like a range of 6 inches in front of you on this thing, and just about everything interferes with it. You're going to hold on to this and the beefier version of it for a while, since that's going to be your best means of knowing what's coming at you. Finally, there's the Ghost Hunter's staple, a tuned shotgun microphone that can let you hear otherworldly screams and help you find clues and cryptid signs. You'll have issues with the little sprite things causing interference, and you'll have to either ditch it as soon as you get into the later areas, as spectral interference will cause your mic to pick up just random screams because even the spirits aren't above jump scares. You can still use it in these low spectral interference maps, but it's going to take a lot of patience to suss out what is an actual sign of a paranormal artifact and what's the ghost just clowning on you. There's one other major tool that you'll get early on, except this one is one that you're likely going to keep using throughout the entire game, called the Dead Man's Map. A few classes start with it, and the Dead Man's Map is one of the best, and also the only, way to find your bearings when it comes to sweeping a house or the woods. The Dead Man's Map will give you a rough outline of the area you're in, and also mark all the corpses on it, earning its name. The reason you'll get it in the first place is that it highlights bones on the map, which you can find, and when you give them a little shaky shake, they whisper secrets to you that mark where artifacts on the map are, or on harder difficulties, will tell you where to find the next set of bones, which will eventually lead you to the artifacts. This is easier to do in some places rather than others, as the forests and the junkyards are kind of vague on exact locations. After a while, you'll figure out that the Dead Man's Map isn't exactly to scale, and that it won't even cover the whole area, so you'll have to figure out some stuff out for yourself. But the Dead Man's Map is still the best you've got, and likely you're going to keep using it all the way through to the end, because at the end of the day, it's still a decent map, and once you learn how to use skeletons as points of reference, you'll get pretty good at finding your way and finding clues, even without using the bones. Once you've gotten some cash and skills to your name, you can start getting the good stuff. Now, once upon a time, the nicer tools were just straightforward upgrades, but now they're better tools that, while they do similar jobs as their predecessors did, they do them in a different way. The first upgrade tree you'll likely get is a bigger blacklight that also acts as a way to highlight runes on the ground that will lead you exactly to where a cryptid is if you want to save power and not pay 30% of your juice to learn exactly where the crypt is hiding. The downside to this is that it has all the same setbacks as the lower level blacklight, which means it's still not all that useful. Then there's the Foxier mic, which is a stronger, interference-resistant version of the shotgun mic, and you can now use it to do forensics like the blacklight does because it picks up traces of paranormal entities on recently deceased bodies, and as an added bonus, you only pay 25% of your power per use versus 30%, meaning that you can snoop out 4 cryptids instead of just 3. The downsides to the Foxier mic is that it only works when it's being used over spectral tendrils that come out of the ground, which heavily limits where you can use it for finding artifacts, and you go from being able to do forensics on any human remains you find to only be able to do them on the recently deceased, which can heavily limit its use. You'll also be able to get a new type of tool in the mid-game in the form of the heat sensor. The heat sensor only works on those tendrils, but when you're using it, it's very useful when you're doing your first pass around a job site and can save you a lot of headache related to the Dead Man's Map, as picking up items will solve the series of clues without you needing to crisscross across the map looking for all the bones. The heat sensor joins the blacklight as the only items that have direct upgrades, as the heat sensor is insanely useful. It also has this condenser mode, which I'm still not exactly sure how you use it. You'll get the Geiger counter, which will tick when you're near artifacts, and you can use it on recently deceased bodies to see if there's an artifact within 8 meters of said body. Its setback is that the tendrils cause interference with the Geiger counter because I guess whatever makes them light up on the heat sensor is radioactive, which makes you question the life expectancy of your typical paranormal tradesman. Finally, you get the Spirit Box, a radio that's been tampered with to act in a way very similar to how the Geiger counter acts, except that it's resistant to even the highest amount of paranormal interference, and the signal comes in much clearer. And when you test it against recently deceased corpses, you can tune the radio to find the exact direction and bearings of the nearest artifact. Like the Geiger counter, you can't use it over tendrils, but once you have the Spirit Box and the heavy-duty heat sensor, you don't really need to use any other tools. However, it would be a whole lot more efficient if you did use your other tools in concert with them, and you'd be getting jumped by cryptids a whole lot less. The other thing that you'll be using a lot of that I've referenced a couple times is the Cryptonomicon, a reference book carried by all hunters, which is an encyclopedia of all things that go bump in the night. It's an in-game wiki that's actually useful and will give you summaries on all the things that you're going to come across and how to best deal with them. Yours is missing a few pages, so you're going to have to buy them from that local fixer, but once you get them all, there's nothing that you won't be able to be prepared for. On top of being a monster manual, you use the Cryptonomicon to do forensic work on paranormal clues you find in order to determine what kind of spiritual presence is haunting an area, what its composition is, and how it transfuses its power. You do this by taking your clues into the investigation page and then cross-referencing blood, structural damage, or the chemical makeup of ectoplasm to figure out exactly what kind of spirit you're dealing with and what gear is best suited to countering it. I enjoy doing this a whole lot, as a lot of the forensic clues are just similar enough to one another to throw you off, so you can't really memorize things, and it really feels like you're doing research on the baddies before going after them. You also get to use this little highlighter to mark certain parts of the text that are relevant to the poltergeist you're studying, and then when you go back into your truck to get new gear and get ready to fight it, all your highlighted notes will show up, which is insanely helpful with gearing up and just the coolest thing. By the way, you can still be entirely wrong about your deduction, so if you aren't careful to double check those blood patterns, you better be ready to run back to your van. Outside of your tools and reference book, you'll also be employing a lot of traps against the forces of spookiness. These range from literally just pouring gasoline on the ground and lighting it up to cook some bugs, to a temporary UV light projector that will vaporize any shadow-based entities caught in its flash. There's also throwable baits and bombs, but I personally didn't spec into those in favor of more investigational skills. And finally, you've got guns and ammo. Guns range from a puny little nail gun that costs literally nothing at the start of the game, to the previously mentioned machine gun, a 9-barrel revolver with an underbarrel shotgun, an off-brand P90, and all sorts of pistols and shotguns. Outside of your guns, you're going to need to carry different types of ammo that can either be light or heavy based on the gun, and ammo comes in 4 flavors: useless, incendiary, which is good for dealing with corporeal threats like bugs, silver nitrate ammo, which is effective against things of an occult nature like ghouls, the Ifrit, and the Mephistopheles, and UV ammo, which kills anything that's made out of shadows like the Shadow Beasts. Make sure to have lots of all types of ammo on hand at all times, as it's fairly cheap to stock up on, and you're going to find yourself discovering that a certain cryptid is just around the corner and you need to run back and grab the right ammo to deal with it, lest you get wrecked thanks to forgetting to restock on silver-tipped slugs. There's also a lot of stuff you can craft if you're up to saving some of the artifacts you find during your missions, like that previously mentioned 9-barrel LeMat revolver, as well as a few cool artifacts that are going to be helpful with dealing with some of the poltergeists. So what about the lore? Well, it's certainly there. I just got busy talking about all the gameplay and stuff and forgot to tell you about it. The story is that at some point in the past, a bunch of portals into other worlds got opened up, including portals to literal hell and the Shadow Realm. People theorize that there's 666 of these portals because Satan number, but so far they've only been able to find just a little under 200 of them. Because these portals and all the spooky things coming out of them are so hard to keep track of, there's been a sort of gold rush of people wanting to get branded in a way that lets them interact with the paranormal and get cash. Of these brands, one of particular note is the HellSign, a very large branding that bonds you to a powerful demon, making you near unkillable, but by the way, you're bound to a very nasty entity. You, the protagonist, have a HellSign, but you also have no memory of how you got said HellSign, and you've been having a lot of spooky nightmares lately. So the story starts with you taking a job and doing some basic work for a more seasoned team, which takes the form of a tutorial. That job takes you to a bar where people from all facets of the paranormal industry hang out, and you take a job from a local fixer to clean out some satanic dust bunnies out of a property, but you get sucked into the Shadow Realm and mauled by those high-level spookies. Everyone thinks you died, but then you show up a few days later expecting your payment. Turns out you did die, but thanks to that HellSign you have, that just means you wind up back at your safe house as if you were waking up from a bad dream. You team up with a lady who's on the more academic side of the paranormal to figure out just what the heck happened to you, which includes working your way up to heavy-duty jobs and pleasing the higher-ups in the VIP lounge over at the bar in order to access the especially hard to get spooky stuff. I won't go much further in depth than that because, full disclosure, at 20 some hours in the game, I haven't quite gotten to the end yet, but even if I did, it's also not quite story complete yet because as I write this, the end is close at hand and Ballistic is still wrapping everything up. It makes sense that they wouldn't put all the details in the story before the game was finished though, as that's not entirely unheard of in early access games. And that's it for HellSign, for now anyway. As I mentioned earlier, Ballistic Interactive released not one but 2 big content updates recently, and they're getting close to putting a big old bow on it, so I'm sure there'll be a bit more stuff to come. As this video goes live, HellSign is on a pretty deep discount right now, and the link to the Steam page is in the description below. I'd encourage all of you to go check it out, as I personally had a great time with HellSign's mix of spooky, investigating, and shooties, and even when the game isn't on sale, it's only $20, which makes it a game that you'll get well over an hour's worth of entertainment per dollar spent. Now, I haven't been asked to do this, but I'd like to personally ask y'all that if you do end up buying and playing this game, regardless of if this video is the thing that spurs you to do so or not, I'm gonna pull a Mandalore Gaming here and ask that you please leave a review of HellSign on the Steam store, whether you liked it or not. I have a good feeling that you will like it, but your opinion is entirely your own, and I respect that. I'm asking because of the controversy I addressed earlier in the video and the subsequent review bombing HellSign got, which might turn people who actually would be interested in the game off it because they see that its recent reviews are mostly negative, but might not look look as far as to realize that a lot of the reviews are from people who barely have an hour in-game or are ranting about things that turned out to be a misunderstanding. That's gonna be all of it for today. If all goes as planned, I'll have the I Divine Cybermancy video out by next Saturday in time for Valentine's Day. I'm looking forward to getting back into making videos now that my not-so-vacation vacation is over and we've got a big year ahead of us. Again, huge thank you to our sponsor for this video, Ballistic Interactive, and until next time, stay safe, stay inside, wash your hands, wear your mask and practice social distancing when you need to go out, and enjoy this cat video. Uh-oh, saucy boy. Is somebody lurking out in front of the kitchen? Is somebody hounding for the snack? Oh, you sniffing, Daddy? You sniffing, Daddy? Oh, no, you... Oh, goodness, are you okay? Are you okay?
What have you done?
I tried to pick him up right as he was jumping and he fell. Hey? Probably should have put the medium on and the light on this thing before filming, but... Oh yeah, he's not in the mood. He's just gonna sit here in the entryway and spy on me while I'm cooking. Because he just can't get enough of snacks no matter where they come from. Isn't that right? I have no idea if you're in frame. Now I gotta wash my hands again because you were... Okay, I have no one to blame but myself for putting my hands on the floor to try to scoop you. What does that look for? You goof?